The jet's roar split the Kansas sky like thunder as Amelia Grant stepped onto the dying farmland she'd once crashed into as a nobody. Ethan Walker stood frozen, watching the woman he'd saved from wreckage return as a billionaire CEO, her eyes holding promises that could either save his family's century-old farm or destroy everything his grandfather built. "You saved my life," she said, wind whipping her hair. "Now let me save yours." But salvation, Ethan would learn, comes with a price that neither money nor love can fully pay. Follow this incredible journey to the end and comment your city below. Let's see how far this story travels. The foreclosure notice trembled in Ethan Walker's calloused hands as thunder rolled across the Kansas plains. 3 generations of Walker blood had soaked into this soil, and in exactly 72 hours, Interstate Commerce Bank would own every acre of it. The yellow paper might as well have been a death certificate, not just for the farm, but for everything his family had ever stood for. "Dad would have found a way," Ethan muttered to the empty kitchen, his voice barely audible over the rain hammering the tin roof. The old farmhouse groaned under the storm's assault, its bones protesting like they knew what was coming. Every leak, every draft, every peeling strip of wallpaper seemed to mock him. "You're not the man your father was. You're not the farmer your grandfather was. You're the Walker who lost it all." Lightning illuminated the fields through the kitchen window. Rows of stunted corn bent nearly horizontal by the wind, their growth stunted by the 3rd year of irregular weather patterns. Climate change, the experts called it. "Bad luck," his neighbor said. "Divine punishment," whispered the voice in Ethan's head during the darkest hours before dawn. He pressed his palms against the scarred oak table where his grandmother had rolled out pie dough, where his father had spread crop rotation maps, where he now spread bills like tarot cards predicting doom. The medical expenses from Sarah's cancer treatment paid, but at the cost of 3 years' savings. The new irrigation system, necessary, but financed at rates that seemed reasonable before the drought. The hybrid seeds that promised better yields, but delivered only broken promises and emptier pockets. "Damn you," he said to the notice, to the storm, to God himself. "Damn all of you." The lights flickered, casting dancing shadows across the family photos lining the walls. His grandparents on their wedding day, standing proud before this very house when it was new. His parents, young and hopeful, holding him as a baby in front of the first harvest he'd ever been part of. Sarah, his wife, radiant in remission but gone these past 2 years, her absence a wound that refused to heal. And scattered between them, photos of harvests, good years when the corn stood tall as houses, bad years when hail or drought took everything, but always years when the Walkers endured. Until now. The storm intensified, and Ethan found himself doing what he'd done every night for the past month, walking through the house like a ghost cataloging what would soon belong to strangers. The living room with its stone fireplace his great-grandfather had built by hand, each rock pulled from Walker fields. The staircase with the 3rd step that creaked no matter how many times they'd tried to fix it. Sarah had called it the house's way of announcing visitors. The main bedroom where the sunrise painted the walls gold in summer. Where Sarah had taken her last breath holding his hand, where he now slept on the couch because the bed felt too vast, too empty, too full of memories. Thunder crashed so close the windows rattled, and Ethan moved to the front porch, drawn by some nameless compulsion to face the storm. The wind hit him like a physical force, rain driving sideways in sheets that soaked him instantly. But he didn't retreat. There was something almost cleansing about nature's violence, something honest about its indifference. The storm didn't care about 3 generations of Walkers. It didn't care about tradition or legacy or the way his father had taught him to read the soil by its feel, its smell, its weight in his palm. That's when he saw it, a light where no light should be, moving too fast and too low across the sky. Not lightning, but something mechanical, something struggling against the storm's fury. The engine's sound came a second later, not the steady drone of a commercial flight, but the stuttering, coughing protest of machinery pushed beyond its limits. "No, no," Ethan breathed, understanding flooding through him as the light grew larger, lower, more erratic. "No, no, no!" Not here, not tonight, but the storm had made its choice. The small aircraft, a sleek private plane that had no business flying in weather like this, pitched violently, its engine cutting out entirely for heart-stopping seconds before sputtering back to life. Ethan could see it now in the lightning flashes, could track its descent toward his fields, toward the eastern plot where the corn grew tallest, where the impact came with a sound like the world tearing apart. Metal shrieked against earth, the plane cartwheeling through his corn, each rotation an explosion of stalks and soil. A fireball bloomed briefly before the rain beat it down, leaving only the orange glow of something burning and the smell of aviation fuel mixing with petrichor. Ethan was running before his mind fully processed what he'd witnessed. His boots slipped in the mud, his breath came in gasps that the wind tried to steal, but 3 generations of walkers had never turned away from someone in need, and he'd be damned if he'd be the first, even if he was the last. The plane had finally come to rest nearly 300 yards into the field, a broken bird with one wing sheared completely off, the fuselage crumpled like a beer can crushed in an angry fist. Smoke poured from the engine compartment, and Ethan could see flames beginning to lick at the underbelly despite the rain's best efforts. "Anyone alive in there?" he shouted, though his voice was swallowed by the storm. He yanked at the pilot door, surprised when it gave way easier than expected. The impact had warped the frame, creating a gap his fingers could find purchase on. The metal was hot, threatening blisters, but Ethan had worked with worse. He'd pulled stubborn calves in sub-zero temperatures, had repaired combine harvesters in 100-degree heat. Pain was just another crop the farm life grew. Inside, illuminated by the dancing flames that were growing bolder despite the rain, was a woman. She was unconscious, blood running from a gash on her forehead, her body held in place by a harness that looked more complex than anything Ethan had seen in civilian aircraft. Her flight suit was dark, expensive-looking, with patches he couldn't read in the shifting light. But what struck him most was how calm her face looked, as if she were merely sleeping through the storm that had tried to claim her life. "Ma'am," he said, reaching for the harness release. "Ma'am, we need to go. This whole thing's about to—" Her eyes snapped open, gray like the storm itself, focused and alert despite the blood, despite the crash, despite everything. For a moment, they just stared at each other, farmer and pilot, 2 strangers brought together by violence and chance. "The case," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "Black case. Behind my seat. Please. Lady, we don't have time. Please." There was something in that word, something that went beyond mere request. Ethan found himself reaching behind her seat, his fingers finding a black metallic briefcase that seemed untouched by the crash, as if it were somehow immune to the laws of physics that had shattered everything around it. The flames were climbing now, the rain losing its battle against aviation fuel and burning composite materials. Ethan popped the harness release, catching her as she slumped forward. She was lighter than he expected, or maybe adrenaline made everything feel weightless. He pulled her from the wreckage, grabbed the case she seemed to value more than her own escape, and ran. They made it perhaps 50 yards before the plane exploded. The concussion knocked Ethan forward, his body automatically curling around the injured pilot to shield her from debris. Heat washed over them, like a preview of hell, and for a moment the rain stopped, vaporized by the inferno that had been an aircraft worth more than Ethan's farm had ever been. When he looked back, the flames were already dying, beaten down by the renewed fury of the storm. In the morning, there would be nothing left but twisted metal and scorched earth, another scar on land already marked by years of struggle. "My house," he said to the woman who was conscious but fading. "It's not much, but—" "Thank you," she whispered, and then her eyes closed again, leaving Ethan to carry her through the storm toward a house that wouldn't be his much longer, to offer shelter he soon wouldn't have the right to give. The walk back seemed endless. Every step was a battle against mud that tried to claim his boots, wind that tried to topple him, rain that turned the world into a watercolor painting running off the canvas. The woman's breathing was steady against his chest, but she'd gone completely limp, her head lolling with each stride. The case banged against his leg with every step, surprisingly heavy for its size, its surface warm to the touch in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. By the time Ethan reached the farmhouse, his muscles were screaming and his lungs felt like they'd been scoured with steel wool. He shouldered through the front door, not caring about the mud he was tracking across floors his grandmother had kept spotless for 60 years. Priorities had a way of shifting when you were carrying an unconscious stranger who'd just fallen from the sky. He laid her on the couch, the same couch where he'd been sleeping to avoid the empty bedroom, and finally got a good look at her in steady light. She was perhaps 35, with dark hair cut practically short and features that belonged on magazine covers despite the blood and bruising. Her flight suit bore no airline logos, just a small emblem he didn't recognize, something that looked like a stylized globe with wings. Everything about her screamed money, from the sophisticated watch on her wrist to the quality of her boots. The gash on her forehead was still bleeding, but not as badly as he'd feared. Ethan had dealt with worse injuries. Farming didn't offer sick days, and the nearest hospital was 40 miles away. You learned basic field medicine, or you learned to live with scars. He fetched his first aid kit, the one Sarah had insisted on keeping stocked, even when money was tight. "You can't grow new fingers, Ethan," she'd say, "but you can prevent losing the ones you've got." The woman stirred as he cleaned the wound, her eyes fluttering open to fix on his face with that same storm gray intensity. "The case," she said immediately. "It's here." He gestured to where he'd set it by the coffee table. "You want to tell me why that was worth almost dying for?" She tried to sit up, winced, and thought better of it. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Lady, I just watched you crash land in my cornfield during the storm of the decade. My belief system's pretty flexible right now." A smile ghosted across her lips. Fair point. She studied him, and Ethan had the unsettling feeling of being evaluated, measured, categorized. "You're the owner? Of the farm? For about 3 more days, yeah." Something shifted in her expression. 3 days? Foreclosure. The bank's been patient, but patience doesn't pay bills. He focused on applying butterfly bandages to her forehead, trying not to think about how he was using medical supplies he couldn't afford to replace on a stranger who'd literally dropped from the sky. "Should probably ask your name, seeing as you're bleeding on my couch." "Amelia." She paused, as if deciding how much to share. "Amelia Grant, Ethan Walker." He finished with the bandages and sat back. "You need a hospital. That head wound needs proper attention, and you probably have a concussion. Maybe worse." "No hospitals." "Lady, Amelia, you just survived a plane crash. You need no hospitals," she repeated, and there was steel in her voice that reminded him of Sarah during her treatment, that same quiet determination that could bend but never break. "I need to stay off the grid for a while." That crash. It wasn't supposed to happen. Mechanical failure? Something like that. She touched the bandages gingerly. "You did good work." "Military?" "4th-generation farmer. You learned to patch things up. Equipment, animals, yourself." He stood, suddenly aware of his own soaked clothes. "I'm going to get you some dry clothes. They were my wife's, but, well, they'll fit better than mine." He retreated to the bedroom he'd been avoiding, opening Sarah's closet for the first time in months. Her clothes still smelled faintly of the lavender sachets she'd loved, and for a moment Ethan couldn't breathe. He grabbed practical things, sweatpants, a University of Kansas t-shirt, thick socks, and fled back downstairs. Amelia had managed to sit up and was examining her black case with careful fingers, checking latches and seals. Whatever was inside, it had survived the crash intact. "Bathroom's down the hall," he said, setting the clothes beside her. "Take your time. I'll make coffee." "Coffee sounds like heaven." She stood carefully, swaying slightly before finding her balance. "Ethan, thank you. Most people would have called authorities first, asked questions later." "Yeah, well, most people aren't watching their family legacy die in 3 days. Guess we're both having a special week." She studied him again with those evaluating eyes. "Maybe we are." While she changed, Ethan stood in his kitchen making coffee and trying to process the surreal turn his evening had taken. He'd woken that morning to another foreclosure notice, spent the day failing to convince the bank to give him one more season, one more chance. He'd planned to spend tonight the way he'd spent the last 30, drinking bourbon older than his mortgage troubles and staring at spreadsheets that never added up to salvation. Instead, he was making coffee for a mysterious pilot who'd crashed in his fields carrying a case she valued more than her own life, who wanted to stay off the grid, who looked at him like he was a problem she was solving in real time. Your wife had good taste. He turned to find Amelia in the doorway, Sarah's clothes hanging loose on her smaller frame. The University of Kansas shirt, one from Sarah's undergraduate days, soft with age and memories, made her look younger, more vulnerable. The bandage on her forehead was already showing spots of blood. She had good everything, Ethan said, handing her a mug.
Cancer took her 2 years ago. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. He gestured to the kitchen table. Sit. You look like you're about to fall over. She sat, cradling the coffee mug like it contained salvation. This is good. About the only thing I can make. Sarah did the cooking. I do the... He gestured vaguely. Everything else. Or I used to. The foreclosure. How much? More than you want to know and way more than I have. Humor me. He named the figure, watching her face for the typical reactions. Shock, pity, the careful distancing of someone realizing they were talking to a failure. Instead, she nodded thoughtfully. Commercial agriculture? Family farm. 300 acres of corn, soybeans in rotation, some wheat. Used to run cattle, but sold them off to pay for Sarah's treatment. No regrets about that, I imagine. Not a single one. I'd sell it all again to have her for even one more day. The words came out raw, honest in a way he hadn't been with anyone since the funeral.
Something about this stranger, this woman who'd fallen from the sky, made pretense seem pointless. Thunder rattled the windows and the lights flickered again. The storm was getting worse, if that was possible. Your plane, Ethan said. There'll be search teams. Emergency responders. No, there won't. She said it with such certainty that he believed her. The flight plan was flexible, and the transponder stopped working about an hour before I crashed. Convenient. Necessary. She took another sip of coffee. I was heading to Denver. Conference on Agricultural Innovation. Seems ironic now, crashing into a farm that's failing despite what I assume is your considerable expertise. Expertise doesn't mean much when the weather won't cooperate and the banks want their money. He sat across from her, suddenly exhausted. You know, I should probably be more concerned about the mysterious woman who crashed in my field with her secret case and convenient transponder failure. You probably should be. But I'm too tired to care. And in 3 days, this'll be the bank's problem anyway. She leaned forward, wincing at the movement. What if it wasn't? What if what wasn't? The bank's problem. What if you could save this place? Ethan laughed, bitter and short. Unless you've got $300,000 in that magic case of yours, there's no saving anything. I might have something better. Lady, Amelia, I appreciate whatever this is, but I'm not in the mood for games or false hope. I've had enough of both to last a lifetime. She studied him for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. May I borrow your phone? Cell towers are probably down in this storm. I need to try. He handed her his ancient flip phone. Sarah had always teased him about it, calling it his farmer phone, indestructible and practical. Amelia looked at it with something between amusement and respect, then dialed a number from memory. It's me, she said when someone apparently answered, turning slightly away. Yes, I'm alive. No, don't send anyone. I said don't because I need to stay dark for at least 48 hours. You know why. A pause. I'm safe. I'm with someone trustworthy. Another pause, and her eyes flicked to Ethan. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I need you to run a title search. Walker Farm, Kansas. Ethan Walker. She listened, then continued. And check our agricultural development fund. The emergency allocation. More listening. I'll explain when I see you. Yes, all of it. Have it ready. She hung up and handed the phone back. Who was that? Someone who owes me favors. She touched her bandaged head again, and Ethan noticed her hand was trembling slightly. I think I need to lie down. You can take the bedroom. I don't use it anyway. The couch is fine. I don't want to impose more than I already have. You crashed in my field. I think we're past worrying about imposition. But she was already moving back to the living room, that black case never leaving her sight.
She lay down carefully, positioning the case on the floor beside the couch, where she could touch it. "Ethan," she said as he turned to go, "that call I made. Things might get complicated in the next few days. More complicated than plane crashes and secret cases? Differently complicated, but I promise, if you trust me, if you give me those 3 days, I'll make it worth your while." "I don't even know who you are." "No," she agreed, her eyes already closing. "You don't. But you saved me anyway. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Ethan stood there for a moment, watching her drift into sleep or unconsciousness. With a head injury, it was hard to tell which. The smart thing would be to call the sheriff, report the crash, let the authorities sort out whatever this was. The safe thing would be to distance himself from this woman and her mysteries before they added more complications to his already complicated life. But Ethan Walker had never been particularly smart or safe. He'd been steady, reliable, traditional, and look where that had gotten him. 3 days from losing everything, with a stranger on his couch who spoke in riddles and made mysterious phone calls about agricultural development funds. He threw another log on the fire, made sure Amelia was breathing steadily, then retreated to the kitchen to sit with his foreclosure notice and his cold coffee. Outside, the storm raged on, tearing at the farm that had weathered 100 years of storms before this one. But something was different tonight. Something had changed when that plane fell from the sky. For the first time in 2 years since Sarah's diagnosis had started their long slide toward this moment, Ethan felt something he'd thought was dead and buried. Curiosity. Not hope. He wasn't ready for hope. But curiosity about what tomorrow might bring, about who this woman really was, about what could be worth crashing into his dying fields. The hours crawled by. Ethan checked on Amelia regularly, worried about the head injury, but her breathing remained steady and her pulse strong. He changed into dry clothes, cleaned up the mud they'd tracked in, and tried not to think about how Sarah would have handled this situation. She would have known what to do, would have had the right questions to ask, the right instincts to trust. Around 3 in the morning, the storm finally began to weaken. The thunder grew distant. The rain softened from assault to persistence. Ethan stood on the porch, looking toward the eastern field where the plane had carved its violent path. In the darkness, he could see nothing, but he knew the scar was there. Another wound on land that had already borne so much. Couldn't sleep either? He turned to find Amelia in the doorway, wrapped in one of Sarah's quilts. Her face was pale but alert, the bandage on her forehead spotted with dried blood. "Farming hours," he said. "Bodies trained to wake before dawn no matter what. Even when there's nothing to farm? Especially then. Habits are all we have when everything else falls apart." She joined him on the porch, pulling the quilt tighter. "It's beautiful here. Even in the dark, even in the rain, there's something about it." "It's dying," Ethan said flatly. "The land's exhausted, the weather's turned against us, and the money people in their city offices have decided there's better use for it than growing food." "Is that what you think? Or what they've convinced you to think?" He looked at her sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean that sometimes we get so focused on surviving each day, we forget to ask why we're fighting so hard to survive in the first place." She gestured to the fields. "This land has been feeding people for 100 years. That's not nothing. It's not enough either. Not anymore. Maybe not the way you've been doing it. And you know a better way? You who crashed a plane in my cornfield?" She smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "I might. Or I might know people who do." "Those people you called? The ones checking agricultural development funds?" "Among others." She turned to face him fully. "Ethan, what if I told you that your farm, this specific farm, could be the testing ground for something revolutionary, something that could change how we think about agriculture?" "I'd say you hit your head harder than I thought." "I'm serious. The challenges you're facing, climate unpredictability, soil depletion, economic pressure from industrial operations, they're not unique to you. They're happening globally. But solutions, real solutions need to be tested somewhere, by someone who understands the land, who has the knowledge passed down through generations, who's desperate enough to try something radical, but experienced enough to implement it right. And you just happen to crash into the perfect desperate farmer?" "I don't believe in coincidence," she said quietly.
I was flying over your land when the storm hit. I could have gone around it, but I saw your fields, the way they're laid out, the traditional rotation pattern still visible even from the air. I thought, here's someone still trying to do it right, even when everything's going wrong. And then you crashed. And then I crashed. But maybe that's what needed to happen. Maybe we both needed something to fall from the sky to shake us out of our patterns. Ethan wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but something in her voice, her eyes, stopped him. You're not really talking about farming, are you? I'm talking about revolution disguised as evolution. I'm talking about taking everything that's been done wrong in industrial agriculture and using your land to prove there's another way. With what money? What resources? I've got 3 days, lady. 3 days before the bank takes everything. Then we'd better get started. She reached for the door. I need to show you something. Inside, she retrieved the black case, setting it on the kitchen table with ceremonial care. The latches clicked open with expensive precision, and inside was nothing Ethan expected. Not money, not drugs, not weapons. Instead, there were vials of what looked like seeds, each labeled with codes he didn't understand. There were soil samples in sealed containers. There was a tablet computer displaying charts and graphs that might as well have been hieroglyphics. And there was a photograph, an aerial view of farmland that looked familiar yet different, verdant in a way that seemed impossible. This is your farm, Amelia said, pointing to the photograph. Or rather, a projection of what your farm could look like in 2 years using these techniques. That's impossible. The soil's too depleted. The soil can be restored. The weather patterns can be mitigated, not controlled but worked with instead of against. She pulled out one of the vials. These seeds are engineered not for maximum yield, but for maximum resilience. They're designed to work with companion plantings, to restore nitrogen naturally, to require less water while producing comparable harvests. GMO? No. Not genetically modified. Selectively bred using traditional techniques accelerated by computer modeling. Every change could have happened naturally, given enough time. We just shortened the timeline. And you want to test them here? On my dying farm? I want to prove that the future of farming isn't in massive industrial operations, but in smart, sustainable, family-run farms that understand their land intimately. She pulled out the tablet, showing him charts he was beginning to understand. Your great-grandfather's rotation patterns were revolutionary for their time. Your grandfather's water management system was ahead of its era. Your father's soil conservation techniques are still studied in agricultural schools. You come from innovators, Ethan. You've just been forced to survive instead of innovate. Even if this is all true, even if these magic seeds and techniques could work, it doesn't change the fact that in 3 days, the bank will be taken care of. How? With what money? She met his eyes steadily. Mine. The word hung between them like a challenge, and suddenly Ethan understood. This wasn't random charity or mysterious benefaction. This was business, even if it was dressed up in the language of revolution and salvation. What's the catch? He asked. Because there's always a catch. The catch is that you have to be willing to change, to try things that might fail, to trust someone you just met, to believe that your farm could be more than a memorial to better times. It could be a blueprint for the future. And what do you get out of it? Proof that my theories work, data that could change agricultural policy globally, and, she hesitated, then continued with unexpected vulnerability, a chance to build something that matters, something real. Outside, the storm was finally dying, reduced to the gentle patter of normal rain. Dawn was still hours away, but Ethan could feel something shifting, some fundamental change in the air that had nothing to do with barometric pressure. Why should I trust you? He asked. I don't even know your last name. Grant, she said. Amelia Grant. And you should trust me because you've got nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Because in 3 days you'll either be starting over with nothing or you'll be starting over with resources you never imagined. Because sometimes salvation doesn't come from working harder at the same old things. It comes from being willing to plant new seeds, literally and figuratively. Ethan looked at the vials of seeds, at the impossible photograph of his verdant farm, at the woman who'd crashed into his life with her mysteries and her promises. Every practical bone in his body screamed that this was too good to be true, that con artists came in all forms, that desperate people made foolish decisions. But Sarah's voice whispered in his memory, "Sometimes, Ethan, you have to have faith in more than just the weather and the soil. Sometimes you have to have faith in people." "All right," he heard himself say, 3 days. We've got 3 days to save this farm or lose it spectacularly. Where do we start?" Amelia smiled, and this time it transformed her entire face, revealing the woman beneath the mystery, brilliant, driven, and maybe just a little bit lost herself. "We start with coffee," she said. "Lots of coffee. And then I need you to tell me everything about this land. Every story, every tradition, every failure and success. Because if we're going to save your farm, I need to understand its soul, not just its soil." As Ethan made a fresh pot of coffee, he wondered what Sarah would think of all this. A mysterious woman falling from the sky, promising salvation in exchange for trust. It sounded like the beginning of either a miracle or a disaster, and after 2 years of nothing but disasters, Ethan was overdue for a miracle. The coffee maker gurgled to life, its familiar sound grounding him in the moment. Whatever happened in the next 3 days, his life was about to change dramatically. The only question was whether he'd be looking back on this night as the moment everything finally turned around, or the moment he lost everything by believing in an impossible dream. Either way, at least he wouldn't go down without a fight. The Walkers had never been quitters, and Ethan wouldn't be the first, even if he might be the last. The first light of dawn painted the kitchen walls a pale gold as Ethan spread out every document he had about the farm across the table. Soil reports from the past decade, yield records going back to his grandfather's time, weather patterns meticulously recorded in leather journals that smelled of age and dedication. Amelia studied each piece with an intensity that reminded him of Sarah reading medical journals, searching for hope in statistics and studies. "Your grandfather started this rotation pattern in 1962, she said, tracing a finger across a hand-drawn map. "See how he divided the eastern field into these smaller sections?" "That's brilliant. He was practicing precision agriculture before the term even existed." "He said the land spoke different languages in different places," Ethan replied, warming to the subject despite himself. "That corner near the creek stays wet longer, so he planted accordingly. The hilltop section drains fast but gets more sun. He treated every acre like it had its own personality." "And your father continued it?" "Refined it. Added the conservation strips in the 80s when everyone else was maximizing planting space. Said he'd rather have 80% of something than 100% of nothing when the topsoil washed away." Amelia pulled out her tablet, overlaying digital maps with the hand-drawn ones. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Generational knowledge combined with modern technology. Your family understood sustainable farming before it became a buzzword." The morning progressed with Ethan explaining decades of farming decisions, while Amelia took notes, asked questions, and occasionally pulled out those mysterious seed vials to compare with his descriptions. She was particularly interested in what he called the failure years, seasons when drought or floods or pests had devastated the crops. 2019 was the worst, he said, showing her photos on his ancient computer. Wet spring delayed planting, then drought hit mid-season, then early frost killed what survived, lost 70% of the corn crop. But you replanted immediately with winter wheat. Had to. Bank needed to see we were still working the land, still trying. Borrowed money for the seed, borrowed more for the spring planting. He laughed bitterly. Each solution just dug the hole deeper. What if you'd had seeds that could handle the wet spring and the drought? What if you could have predicted the weather patterns 3 months out instead of 3 days? What if pigs could fly and banks had hearts? She smiled at that. Fair point. But look at this. She showed him data on her tablet, charts showing weather pattern analysis, soil moisture predictions, something called microclimate mapping that seemed to read the farm's quirks the way his grandfather had, but with satellite precision. "This is your farm from 6 months ago," she said, zooming in on a thermal image. "See these variations?" A traditional operation would plant the same crop uniformly across this field. But with precision planting, you could plant 3 different varieties, each optimized for its specific microclimate. That's 3 times the work. With traditional methods, yes, but not with the right equipment. GPS-guided planters, variable rate seeders, drone monitoring. The initial investment is significant, but the yield improvement and resource savings pay for it within 2 seasons. Initial investment, Ethan repeated. With money I don't have for equipment I couldn't afford to maintain. Which is where I come in. She closed the tablet and met his eyes. Ethan, I need to be completely honest with you about who I am and what I'm proposing. That would be a refreshing change. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the fields now visible in the growing light. The storm had passed, leaving the air crystal clear and the world washed clean. Or maybe just exposed, all the farm struggles visible in the morning sun. My full name is Amelia Grant. I'm the CEO of Grant Global Agricultural Systems. Ethan felt his coffee mug freeze halfway to his lips. Grant Global was massive, one of those agricultural conglomerates that usually ended up buying failed farms for pennies on the dollar, turning family land into industrial operations. You're here to buy me out, he said, his voice flat. All this talk about revolution and sustainability, and you're just another corporate vulture circling a dying carcass. No. She turned from the window, and her eyes held something fierce, almost desperate. I'm here because I'm trying to destroy everything my company has stood for. What? Grant Global was my father's company. He built it on industrial farming, maximum yields, chemical dependence. He turned farming into factory work, stripped it of everything that made it sustainable, everything that made it, she searched for the word, honorable. And now you run it. And now I'm trying to change it. Do you have any idea how hard it is to turn a massive corporation in a completely different direction? The board fights me at every turn. The shareholders want quarterly profits, not long-term sustainability. Every initiative I propose gets watered down, compromised, killed by committee. She returned to the table, sat down heavily. The composed woman who'd survived a plane crash was cracking, showing someone exhausted by fighting battles on multiple fronts. So you want to use my farm as what? A test case? A proof of concept. One farm using revolutionary techniques, showing profitability within 2 years. Real profitability, not subsidized, not propped up by corporate funding. Something I can take to my board and say, look, this works. This is the future. And if it fails, then I lose my position. The company continues its destructive path, and you lose nothing you weren't going to lose anyway. Ethan stood, pacing now, his mind racing. Why the secrecy? The crashed plane, the staying off grid. Because there are people in my company who would rather see me fail than see the company change. Because if they knew what I was planning, they'd either try to stop it or corrupt it into something that serves the old model. She touched her bandaged forehead. The crash was real, but my being off radar for a few days, that gives me time to set things in motion they can't stop. This is insane. This is necessary. She pulled out a folder from beneath the tablet, one he hadn't noticed before. These are contracts. Legal documents that would transfer your debt to a holding company I control personally, not Grant Global. You'd maintain ownership of the farm, but we'd be partners in the transformation. 70-30 split, you maintaining majority ownership. Why would you give me majority ownership? Because this only works if you're invested in it succeeding. Because the knowledge in your head, in those journals, in this land's history, is worth more than any percentage of profit. Because, she paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Because I've spent the last 5 years surrounded by people who see land as commodity, not legacy. I need to work with someone who understands what we're really trying to save. Ethan picked up the contracts, scanning them with eyes trained by years of desperate loan applications. The terms were almost too good: debt assumption, equipment provision, guaranteed minimum income during transition, even a restoration fund for the farmhouse. There's got to be a catch. The catch is that everything we do gets documented. Every success, every failure. The catch is that when this works, and it will work, your farm becomes the model for hundreds of others. You'll have agricultural students, farmers, researchers coming through here. Your private family land becomes a public example. And if I say no, then I make some phone calls, transfer enough money to pay off your bank, and disappear from your life. You keep your farm but continue struggling the same way you have been, probably losing it in another few years when the next crisis hits. Or we change the world, starting with 300 acres in Kansas. Before Ethan could respond, his phone rang. The ancient flip phone's shrill tone seemed absurd after such a conversation. He almost ignored it, but a lifetime of responsibility made him answer. Ethan? It's Jim Morrison from the bank. His stomach clenched. Morrison only called with bad news, usually delivered with the false sympathy of someone who'd never missed a meal or wondered how to keep land in the family. Jim, I'm calling about the foreclosure. There's been a development. Here it comes, Ethan thought. They've moved up the date. They've found some clause to take the equipment too. What kind of development? We've received a payment. Full payoff of your loan, including all interest and penalties. The kitchen spun slightly. Ethan gripped the counter. What? Electronic transfer this morning from something called Agricultural Innovation Partners. They've also submitted paperwork for an operational loan with your farm as a partner entity. Ethan, what's going on? This is highly unusual. Ethan looked at Amelia, who was watching him with those storm gray eyes, calm and certain. I'll have to call you back, Jim. But the paperwork needs... He hung up. The flip phone clicked shut with a finality that seemed to echo in the kitchen. You already did it, he said, before I agreed. Before we even talked terms. I did what needed to be done to give you a real choice, Amelia replied. You can walk away now, own your farm free and clear, and I'll never bother you again. Or you can sign those contracts and we see if we can prove there's a better way. Why? The word came out raw. Why do you care so much about one failing farm in Kansas? She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight of history he hadn't expected. My grandfather was a farmer. Small operation in Nebraska before my father convinced him to sell, to invest in what became Grant Global. Grandpa died 6 months later. My father said it was a heart attack, but I knew better. It was heartbreak. He'd sold his soul for stock options, traded his legacy for a portfolio. She stood, walked to the window again, drawn to the view of land she'd crashed into. I've spent my entire adult life trying to undo what my father built while pretending to enhance it. Every sustainable initiative, every conservation program, every attempt to return dignity to farming has been a battle. I'm tired of fighting from the inside. I need a win, Ethan. I need proof that the way your grandfather farmed, the way you want to farm, isn't just romantic nostalgia. It's the future. The morning sun was fully up now, streaming through the kitchen windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced like possibilities in the air. Ethan could hear birds singing, probably grateful the storm had passed. The sound reminded him of mornings with Sarah, planning their day over coffee, back when they thought they had unlimited mornings ahead of them. She would have liked you, he said suddenly. Your wife. Sarah. She would have liked your combination of idealism and pragmatism. She was the same way. Believed we could save the farm while being smart enough to know belief wasn't enough. She sounds remarkable. She was. And she would have told me I'd be an idiot to turn down this opportunity. He picked up the contracts again. But she also would have asked the hard questions. Like what happens when your board finds out? What happens if the transformation doesn't happen fast enough for your timeline? Then I fight harder, and we adjust the timeline. This isn't a sprint, Ethan. It's a marathon where we're already behind but have better training than anyone realizes. You crash-landed in my field 12 hours ago. We don't even know if you have a concussion, and we're planning to revolutionize agriculture. Strange things have happened. Name one. A fourth-generation farmer trusted a stranger enough to save her life without calling authorities. That same farmer is still listening to her crazy proposals instead of throwing her out. Maybe that farmer is just too tired to argue. Or maybe he recognizes a last chance when it literally falls from the sky. Ethan set down the contracts and really looked at Amelia. The bandage on her forehead was slightly crooked. Sarah's old clothes made her look younger than her corporate persona suggested. And there was something in her eyes that went beyond business, beyond revolution. There was need there, the kind of desperate hope he recognized from his own mirror. If we do this, he said slowly, we do it right. No corporate shortcuts, no chemical quick fixes that'll poison the water table. We farm the way my grandfather would have if he'd had access to modern tools. Agreed. And the house gets restored properly. Not modernized, restored. It stays a farmhouse, not some corporate showcase. Of course. And if it fails, it won't fail. But if it does, the land stays in my family. No corporate seizure clauses, no hidden transfers. The land stays yours. Always. He picked up the pen, an old Bic that had probably signed a dozen loan applications, all of them ultimately failures. But this felt different. This felt like signing a Declaration of Independence, or maybe a declaration of war against the way things had always been done. Sarah used to say that the biggest risk was not taking any risks at all, he said, and signed his name. Amelia's smile was radiant, transforming her face from corporate composed to genuinely joyful. She was right. So what now? Do we plant your magic seeds and wait for Jack's beanstalk to grow? Now we get to work. But first, I need to make some more calls, set things in motion, and you need to decide which field we start with. The eastern field. Where you crashed. Seems appropriate, doesn't it? Starting something new where something literally fell apart. Poetic. I like it. As Amelia made her calls, speaking in rapid bursts of technical and financial terminology that might as well have been a foreign language, Ethan walked out to survey his land with new eyes. The storm had left damage, some fencing down, the old oak by the barn had lost a major limb, and of course the black scar where the plane had carved its path. But the land itself looked refreshed, like it had needed that violent cleansing to prepare for something new. He walked to the crash site, the earth still smoldering in places, pieces of aircraft scattered like modern art against the traditional landscape. The contrast was jarring, high-tech wreckage in a field his great-grandfather had first plowed with horses. But maybe that was the point. Maybe progress had always looked like disaster at first, change arriving with violence and fear before settling into something revolutionary. His phone rang again. This time it was Tom Harrison, his nearest neighbor and closest thing to a friend since Sarah's death. Ethan, you okay? Saw some smoke from your eastern field this morning. Lightning strike, Ethan said, the lie coming easily. Took out some corn. Damn. As if you needed more problems. Listen, I heard about the foreclosure. If you need help moving stuff or just want to get drunk and curse the universe. Actually, Tom, there's been a development. The farm's safe. Silence. Then, what? How? Found an investor. Someone who believes in sustainable farming, wants to try some new techniques. New techniques? Ethan, those corporate types will promise you anything then. This is different. I'll explain later. But Tom, things are going to be changing around here. Good changes, I think. Well, I'll be damned. Sarah must be pulling strings from up there. Maybe she is. After he hung up, Ethan stood in his damaged field, surrounded by debris from Amelia's crash, and laughed. Really laughed, for the first time since Sarah's diagnosis. The absurdity of it all. Salvation arriving in the form of a plane crash, his farm's future depending on a CEO with a grudge against her own company, his grandfather's farming methods potentially becoming the template for global agricultural reform. You find something funny? He turned to find Amelia picking her way through the field, having traded Sarah's clothes for her flight suit, which she'd somehow cleaned and dried. It made her look professional again, competent, like someone who could actually deliver on impossible promises. All of this, he said, gesturing at the wreckage, it's insane. The best stories always are. She bent down, picked up a piece of the plane's fuselage. You know what this is made of? Carbon fiber composite. Stronger than steel, lighter than aluminum. Revolutionary when it was introduced. Now it's just expensive wreckage in a cornfield. Your point. Innovation always looks like destruction at first. My plane had to crash for us to meet. Your farm had to fail for you to be willing to try something radical. Sometimes things need to fall apart before they can be rebuilt better. That's either very profound or complete bullshit. Can it be both? They stood together in the damaged field, surrounded by the intersection of tradition and technology, failure and possibility. The morning sun climbed higher, and Ethan could feel the heat building, the humidity that would make the afternoon oppressive. But for now, in this moment, the air was clear and full of potential. "There's something else," Amelia said, her tone shifting to serious. "The next few days are going to be intense. My disappearance will have been noticed by now. When I resurface, there will be questions, investigations. The crash will need to be reported eventually. Will you be in trouble? Probably. But that's my problem to handle. Your job is to be ready for what comes next. Reporters might show up. Other farmers will definitely be curious. The Agriculture Extension Office will want to know what we're doing. Can you handle that? I've been handling curious neighbors and government busybodies my whole life. This will be different. This will be scrutiny like you've never experienced. Every success will be questioned, every failure magnified. Still better than losing the farm. Is it? Because you could walk away now with your land free and clear. No obligations, no scrutiny, no partnership with someone you barely know. Ethan looked at her, this woman who'd literally fallen into his life, who offered impossible dreams with practical contracts, who carried her own failures as visibly as he carried his. My grandmother used to say that the land doesn't belong to us, we belong to the land, that our job was to leave it better than we found it. For 3 generations, we've managed that, even if just barely. But lately, I've been failing that promise. The soil's depleted, the yields are dropping, the whole operation is dying by degrees. He picked up a handful of earth, dark and rich, but not as rich as it should be, not as rich as it had been when his father worked it. If your crazy plan has even a chance of restoring this land, of making it productive and sustainable for another generation, then I'd be a fool and a coward to walk away. Sarah didn't raise a coward, and my grandfather didn't raise fools. Then we'd better get to work. They spent the rest of the morning planning, Amelia on her tablet and phone coordinating deliveries and equipment, while Ethan prepared the eastern field for its transformation. The physical work felt good, purposeful, in a way it hadn't in months. Every piece of wreckage he cleared was like removing an obstacle to the future. By noon, the first delivery arrived. A truck bearing equipment Ethan had only read about in farming journals he couldn't afford to subscribe to anymore. Precision planners, soil sensors, a drone for field mapping. The driver, clearly confused by the delivery address, kept checking his paperwork. "You're sure this is the Walker farm?" he asked. "Pretty sure, seeing as I've lived here my whole life. It's just, this equipment is usually going to the big corporate operations. No offense. None taken. Things are changing." As the driver unloaded, Amelia emerged from the house with sandwiches and fresh coffee. She'd found Sarah's apron, the one with sunflowers that Ethan hadn't been able to bring himself to pack away, and seeing her wear it hit him with unexpected emotion. "Sorry," she said, noticing his expression. "I should have asked." "No, it's good." Sarah would approve of it being used, not just hanging there like a memorial. They ate lunch on the porch, watching more deliveries arrive. Seeds in temperature-controlled containers, organic fertilizers, even a small weather station that would provide microclimate data. "How is all this being paid for?" Ethan asked. "Personal funds, not Grant Global's. Money I inherited from my grandfather, ironically enough. Money that came from selling his farm. Seems appropriate to use it to save another one." "Your father must be rolling in his grave." "My father is very much alive and will be very much furious when he finds out. But that's a battle for another day." Tom Harrison's truck appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust on the long drive. He parked and emerged with the careful movements of a man expecting trouble or miracles, not sure which would be worse. "Ethan," he said, then noticed Amelia. "Ma'am." "Tom, this is Amelia Grant. She's the investor I mentioned." Tom's eyes narrowed. "Grant? Like Grant Global Grant?" "The same," Amelia said, extending her hand. "Though this is a personal project, not a corporate one." Tom shook her hand reluctantly. "No offense, ma'am, but Grant Global has been buying up failed farms around here for years, turning them into industrial operations that poison the water and exhaust the soil. Which is exactly what we're trying to prove doesn't have to happen. Amelia replied calmly. Mister, Walker's farm is going to demonstrate that sustainable, profitable farming is possible without destroying the land for future generations. Using Walker's farm as an experiment. Using Walker's expertise and 3 generations of knowledge combined with modern technology to create something better than either approach alone could achieve. Tom looked at Ethan. You sure about this? No, Ethan admitted, but I'm sure about trying, and I'm sure that doing nothing means losing everything. Tom surveyed the equipment being unloaded, whistled low. That's probably $100,000 of gear. 200, Amelia corrected, but worthless without someone who knows how to use it properly. And you think Ethan knows how to use all this high-tech stuff? I think Ethan knows this land better than any satellite mapping ever could. The technology just helps him implement what he already knows more efficiently. Tom stayed for another hour, helping to organize equipment, asking pointed questions that Amelia answered with surprising technical knowledge. By the time he left, he seemed, if not convinced, at least less skeptical. She knows her stuff, he told Ethan quietly before departing, but be careful. Corporate types always have angles you don't see coming. I know, but what choice do I have? There's always a choice. Just make sure you're making it for the right reasons. As Tom's truck disappeared, Amelia touched Ethan's arm. He cares about you. We've been neighbors for 20 years. His kids learned to ride horses on my farm. He was one of Sarah's pallbearers. Community. That's something else industrial farming destroys. Neighbors become competitors instead of allies. Is that going in your report to the board? The social benefits of sustainable farming? Everything goes in the report. Every aspect of what makes this approach superior. Economic, environmental, social. We're not just growing crops, Ethan. We're growing proof that there's a better way. The afternoon brought more activity. A soil scientist arrived to take samples, treating the earth with the reverence of an archaeologist at a dig site. An equipment specialist began setting up the weather station and soil sensors, creating a network that would provide real-time data about conditions across the farm. Through it all, Ethan felt like he was watching his familiar world transform into something alien, yet exciting. Every piece of equipment, every technical explanation, every projection of future yields felt like science fiction. But the land beneath it all remained the same. The same fields his great-grandfather had broken. The same soil that had supported his family for a century. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber that reminded him painfully of Sarah's favorite time of day, Amelia found him standing by the old oak tree that had weathered the storm, minus a few branches. Second thoughts, she asked? Third and fourth thoughts. But not doubts, if that makes sense. Perfect sense. Doubt is just fear dressed up as wisdom. But second thoughts? Those are just wisdom, making sure you're paying attention. Very philosophical for a CEO. Very practical for a farmer. She leaned against the tree, looking tired despite her energy throughout the day. The bandage on her forehead needed changing, and Ethan noticed she'd been favoring her left side. You should see a doctor. Tomorrow, once I've officially resurfaced. Tonight, I just want to stand here and look at what we're building. We haven't built anything yet. Haven't we? She gestured to the equipment, the prepared field, the seeds waiting to be planted. The hardest part of any revolution isn't the fighting. It's deciding to fight in the first place. As if to punctuate her words, a notification chimed on her tablet. She glanced at it, and her expression darkened. What is it? My father. He knows about the plane. He's sending a retrieval team. Here? They don't know exactly where I am yet, but they will soon. I've got maybe 12 hours before I have to face him. And then the real fight begins. He'll try to stop this, claim it's corporate resources being misused, that I'm having some kind of breakdown. He might even try to have me removed as CEO. Can he do that? With board support, yes. And he's been building that support while I've been trying to change things from within. She turned to face him. I might not be able to protect this project if he moves against me. You need to know that. But the contracts are legally binding. The farm is safe. The initial investment is secured. But the ongoing support, the connections to markets, the publicity that would make this model spreadable, all of that depends on my position. Ethan felt the familiar weight of impending disaster, the same feeling he'd had watching Sarah's test results, watching the bank notices pile up, watching the storm approach the night before. So we might fail anyway. We might, but we might not. And that's better odds than you had yesterday. You're asking me to bet everything on might not. I'm asking you to bet on yourself, on your knowledge, your land, your determination. I'm just providing tools. You're the one who has to make them work. They stood together as darkness fell, the first stars appearing in the clear post-storm sky. Somewhere in that darkness was Amelia's world of corporate battles and boardroom coups. But here, in this moment, there was only the land and the promise of seeds waiting to be planted. My grandfather used to say that farming was an act of faith, Ethan said. Faith that sun would follow rain, that seeds would sprout, that harvest would come. Maybe this is just another version of that faith. Maybe it is. Amelia pulled out a set of keys, handed them to him. These are for the equipment. Start learning it tonight. We plant tomorrow, regardless of what happens with my father. Tomorrow? The field's not ready, the soil tests aren't back. Sometimes you have to plant before you're ready, just to prove to yourself and everyone else that you're committed. We can adjust as we go, but we need something in the ground, something growing, something my father can't undo with paperwork and board votes. She walked back toward the house, leaving Ethan with keys to equipment worth more than he'd made in the last 5 years combined. He looked at the keys, then at the stars, then at the dark outline of the eastern field where tomorrow they would plant the seeds of revolution or folly. Sarah, he said quietly to the night, I hope you're watching this. I hope you understand, and I hope you're laughing at the absurdity of it all. A breeze stirred the leaves of the old oak, and for just a moment he could swear it sounded like laughter. The morning arrived with mechanical precision, announced not by roosters but by the sound of vehicles approaching on the long dirt road. Ethan had been awake for hours, studying the equipment manuals by lamplight, trying to compress years of technological evolution into a single night's cramming. His fingers were stained with oil from practicing with the precision planner, and his mind buzzed with terms like variable rate application and geo-referenced yield mapping. Amelia stood at the kitchen window, her posture rigid as she watched the convoy approach. 3 black SUVs, the kind that screamed corporate power, followed by a flatbed truck presumably for the plane's wreckage. He brought lawyers, she said, her voice carefully neutral. That's the second vehicle. I can tell by the way it maintains exact following distance. Lawyers always follow rules, even when they're breaking them. Should I make coffee? Ethan asked, the mundane question feeling absurd given the circumstances. God, yes. If I'm going to face my father, I need caffeine. The vehicles pulled up with orchestrated precision and outstepped a man who could only be Amelia's father. Richard Grant carried himself like someone who'd never doubted his own authority, silver-haired and sharp-suited, with the kind of presence that made rooms reorganize themselves around him. The lawyers followed, tablets and briefcases at ready, then what looked like a private security team. Dramatic much? Amelia muttered, but Ethan heard the tension beneath her sarcasm. Richard Grant didn't knock. He simply stood at the door, waiting until Amelia opened it, a power play so subtle and effective that Ethan immediately understood where Amelia had learned her strategic thinking. Amelia! Her father's voice was controlled fury wrapped in paternal concern. You've had everyone quite worried. I've been busy not dying, thanks for asking. The plane crashed. Yes. Mr. Walker here saved my life. Richard's gaze shifted to Ethan, evaluating and dismissing him in the same glance. Mr. Walker, I understand we have you to thank for our daughter's safety. Grant Global will, of course, compensate you for any damages to your property. Already taken care of, Amelia said before Ethan could respond. Mr. Walker and I have a business arrangement. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Richard's expression didn't change, but something shifted, like a predator catching a scent. What kind of arrangement? Amelia pulled out the contracts, laying them on the kitchen table with deliberate casualness. Agricultural Innovation Partners. My personal project using my personal funds. Nothing to do with Grant Global. Richard picked up the contracts, scanning them with practiced efficiency. The lawyers huddled behind him, whispered consultations passing between them like prayers. "You're using your inheritance," he said finally. "Your grandfather's money." Seems appropriate, doesn't it? Using money from the sale of one farm to save another? To waste on another, you mean? This romantic notion of sustainable farming, it's economically unviable. We've run the models. You've run models based on industrial farming assumptions, scale, monoculture, chemical dependence. This is different. This is fantasy. He set down the contracts with dismissive finality. "Mr. Walker, I apologize for my daughter involving you in her episode. Whatever she's promised you, she's promised me a chance," Ethan interrupted, finding his voice. "Which is more than the bank offered, more than the government offered, more than anyone offered. So with all due respect, Mr. Grant, your daughter's episode saved my family's farm." Richard studied him more carefully this time, recalibrating his assessment. "You're the one who's been refusing buyout offers for 3 years. I'm the one who's been trying to keep my family's legacy alive. Yes." Legacy. Richard said the word like it tasted bitter. "Mr. Walker, are you familiar with the concept of sunk cost fallacy?" "I'm familiar with the concept of commitment, if that's what you mean." "Dad, stop." Amelia stepped between them. "This isn't about the farm. This is about control. You can't stand that I'm doing something without your approval. I can't stand watching you destroy everything we've built on some quixotic crusade. The board is already asking questions. Your sudden disappearance, the unauthorized funds transfer, personal funds, my funds. You're CEO of a publicly traded company. Everything you do reflects on Grant Global. Then maybe I shouldn't be CEO." The words hung in the air like an explosion delayed, everyone understanding the impact before it fully registered. Richard's composure finally cracked, just slightly, a fissure in marble. "You would throw away everything for this? For some farmer you just met in his failing land? I would throw away everything for the chance to build something better than what you created. Something that doesn't strip the earth bare and call it efficiency." "You sound like your grandfather." "Good." Father and daughter faced each other across the kitchen Sarah had once filled with laughter, and Ethan saw the family resemblance clearly, the same iron will, the same strategic mind, but aimed at opposite goals. "The board will remove you," Richard said quietly. "I'll make sure of it." "You'll try." "I'll succeed." "And then what? You'll live here? Become a farmer's wife? Give up everything you've worked for to play in the dirt?" Amelia's laugh was sharp. "You think so small, Dad." "I'm not giving up anything. I'm building something you never could, a company with a conscience. Companies don't have consciences, they have shareholders. And that's why Grant Global will eventually fail, because you can't see past the next quarterly report to the world we're leaving behind." One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Ms. Grant, if I may, the board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. Your presence is required." "Required or requested?" "Required. Failure to appear will be considered abandonment of position." Amelia nodded slowly. "Then I'll be there. But first we plant." "Plant?" Richard's confusion was genuine. "Plant what?" "The future," Amelia said, then turned to Ethan. "Get the seeds." "We're starting now." "Amelia, this is ridiculous. What's ridiculous is flying 300 miles to drag me back like a runaway teenager. What's ridiculous is being so threatened by change that you'd rather destroy your own daughter than let her try something different." She grabbed the specialized seed containers from the counter. "You want to watch?" "Fine. Watch me plant seeds. Watch me get dirt under my manicured nails. Watch me do something grandfather would have been proud of." She strode out of the house, leaving Ethan with Richard Grant and his entourage. The CEO looked at him with something between pity and contempt. "She's having a breakdown," Richard said. "The stress of trying to change a company that doesn't want to change. You're enabling her delusion." "Or maybe she's enabling mine," Ethan replied. "Either way, we're planting today." He followed Amelia out, aware of the procession behind him. Richard, the lawyers, security, all of them following like a funeral parade for common sense. The morning sun was brilliant, the air clean and sharp after the storm. Perfect planting weather, his grandfather would have said. Amelia had already started the precision planter, the machine humming with technological sophistication. She looked incongruous operating it in her father's presence, like watching a ballet dancer drive a tank. But her movements were confident, practiced. She'd done her homework. "You know how to use that?" Ethan asked. "YouTube University. Amazing what you can learn at 2 in the morning when you can't sleep." She adjusted the settings, inputting the soil data they'd collected. Eastern Field, Section 1. "We're planting the drought-resistant hybrid first." "The board will stop this," Richard called out. "They'll freeze the funds, void the contracts." "The contracts are ironclad," Amelia shot back, not looking at him. "I had the best lawyers in the business draft them. Your lawyers, actually, before you turned them against me." She began driving the planter across the field, the machine depositing seeds with GPS-guided precision. Ethan walked alongside, monitoring depth and spacing, making minor adjustments. It should have felt strange, this high-tech planting under corporate scrutiny, but instead it felt like rebellion, like revolution, like hope. Tom Harrison's truck appeared again, followed by 2 more vehicles. Word had spread, the rural communication network faster than any internet. Neighbors came to watch Ethan Walker plant his field with equipment they'd only seen in trade magazines, funded by a CEO who was apparently at war with her own father. "Ethan," Tom called out, "you sure about this?" "No," Ethan called back, "but I'm doing it anyway." More neighbors arrived. The Johnsons from the next farm over. Old Pete Williams, who'd gone to school with Ethan's father. The Martinez family who'd bought the Caldwell place 5 years back. They lined the edge of the field like spectators at the strangest sporting event Kansas had ever seen. "This is absurd," Richard muttered to his lawyers. "She's turned it into a circus." But Ethan saw something different in his neighbors' faces. Not mockery, but curiosity. Not judgment, but hope. Every one of them fought the same battles he did: weather, banks, soil depletion, market forces. They were watching one of their own try something impossible. And part of them wanted it to work, needed it to work. Because if Ethan could save his farm this way, maybe there was hope for all of them. The planting took 3 hours. 3 hours of Amelia driving the planter with focused determination while her father made increasingly urgent phone calls. 3 hours of Ethan adjusting, monitoring, occasionally taking over when Amelia needed a break. 3 hours of their neighbors watching, discussing, some even taking notes. When they finished the first section, 20 acres planted with revolutionary seeds and desperate hope, Amelia shut down the planter and faced her father. "It's done. The seeds are in the ground. In 70 days, you'll see the results. In 70 days, you'll be removed as CEO, and this farm will be bankrupt again." "Maybe. But the seeds will still grow. That's the thing about seeds, Dad. Once they're planted, they don't care about corporate politics." She pulled off her work gloves, expensive leather ones that were now stained with soil and oil, and handed them to him. "Keep these. A reminder that your daughter got her hands dirty doing something real instead of just moving numbers on spreadsheets." Richard took the gloves automatically, his expression unreadable. For a moment, just a moment, Ethan thought he saw something crack in the older man's armor. Pride, perhaps, or pain, or maybe recognition of his father in his daughter's defiance. "The meeting is at 10 tomorrow, Richard said finally. "Don't be late." He turned and walked back to his convoy, the lawyers and security falling in behind him like iron filings following a magnet. They drove away in the same formation they'd arrived in, leaving dust and questions in their wake. The neighbors began dispersing too, but not before approaching Ethan with questions, congratulations, warnings. Pete Williams gripped his shoulder with hands gnarled by decades of farming. "Your daddy would be proud," he said. "Win or lose, you're fighting." That's all any of us can do. As the last pickup truck disappeared down the road, Amelia sank onto the ground right there in the field, her professional composure finally crumbling. Ethan sat beside her, 2 people surrounded by freshly planted earth and uncertain futures. "He's going to destroy me," she said quietly. "He has the votes, the connections, the ruthlessness. Tomorrow at that meeting, I'll be removed as CEO, and everything I've tried to build will be dismantled." Then why did we just plant? Why go through all this if you know it's over? She picked up a handful of soil, letting it run through her fingers. Because some things are worth doing even if they fail. Because I needed to prove to myself that I tried everything. Because... She looked at him. Because I needed to know what it felt like to plant something with my own hands. To create instead of acquire. Very philosophical for someone who just lost a corporate war. Haven't lost yet. Still have tonight to prepare my defense. What defense? You said he has the votes. He has the board members who think like him. But there are others, younger members who've been quietly supportive of my initiatives. If I can show them this, show them what we did today, maybe I can swing enough votes to survive. A 20-acre field of barely planted seeds against a corporate empire. David had a slingshot. I have precision agriculture and a fourth-generation farmer who refused to give up. Ethan stood, offered her his hand. Then we'd better get you ready for battle. They spent the rest of the day documenting everything. Ethan provided decades of yield data, soil analyses, weather patterns. Amelia compiled it into a presentation that transformed dry statistics into a story of struggle and potential. They photographed the planted field, the new equipment, the neighbors who'd come to watch. She interviewed Ethan on video, capturing his knowledge, his passion, his quiet desperation transformed into determined hope. "This is good," she said, reviewing the material on her laptop. "This is really good. It's not just about the farm anymore. It's about a new model, a new way forward. Will it be enough? Honestly? Probably not. But at least I'll go down fighting for something I believe in." That evening, as Amelia prepared to leave for the city and her corporate showdown, she stood in Sarah's clothes one last time, looking out at the planted field. The setting sun painted everything gold, making the disturbed earth look like rows of possibility. "I'll be back," she said, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. "I'll be here," Ethan replied, and that at least was certain. She changed into her corporate armor, a suit that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage, and transformed back into CEO Amelia Grant, powerful and polished. But Ethan could still see the soil under her fingernails that she hadn't quite managed to clean away. "Thank you," she said at the door, "for saving me from the crash, for trusting me with your land, for fighting alongside me even though we just met. Thank you for falling out of the sky at exactly the right moment." She smiled, sad but genuine. "Take care of those seeds. Even if everything else fails, I want to know they grew." A rental car had arrived to take her to the airport. She couldn't very well fly, given recent events. Ethan watched the taillights disappear into the darkness, then turned back to his transformed farm. The new equipment sat like monuments to ambition. The planted field looked no different from any other recently sown land. But something had changed, something fundamental. He spent the night in the eastern field with a camping lantern and the equipment manuals, learning every function, every capability. If Amelia couldn't protect their partnership, he'd need to know how to use these tools himself, how to maintain them, how to make them last long enough to prove the concept worked. Around midnight, his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Board meeting moved to 8 a.m. Dad's trying to catch me off guard. Wish me luck." He texted back, "Luck is for people who don't have soil under their fingernails." Her response was immediate. "Then I should be fine." The next morning, Ethan worked the fields as he always had, but with one eye on his phone waiting for news. The seeds needed water, not too much, just enough to encourage germination. The new irrigation system was a marvel, delivering precise amounts based on soil moisture sensors. His grandfather would have been amazed and suspicious in equal measure. Tom Harrison stopped by around 10, bringing coffee and curiosity. "Heard Richard Grant tried to shut you down yesterday." "Tried to shut his daughter down. I just happened to be collateral damage." "She really give up everything for this experiment?" "She gave up everything for the chance to prove her father wrong. The experiment is just the method. Hell of a risk. Everything worth doing is." They stood watching the irrigation system work its magic, precise streams of water nurturing seeds that might or might not change everything. "You know the whole county's watching," Tom said. "If this works, it'll work." "How can you be sure?" Ethan thought about Amelia's determination, her grandfather's money finally serving its original purpose. The seeds engineered for resilience rather than just yield. Because it has to. His phone rang at 11:47. Unknown number, but he knew. Ethan. Amelia's voice was strange, hollow, but triumphant. What happened? I'm no longer CEO of Grant Global. His heart sank. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not fired. I resigned after winning the vote. What? 52%. The younger board members, two institutional investors who've been pushing for sustainable practices, and surprisingly, my father's oldest friend who said I reminded him of my grandfather. I won, Ethan. I could have stayed. But winning that battle would have meant fighting every decision, every initiative, every change, so I made them an offer. I resign, take my inheritance and my supporters' backing, and start something new. Agricultural Innovation Partners goes from personal project to full company. They keep Grant Global and the old ways. I take the people who want to build something better. You gave up a Fortune 500 CEO position to start over? I gave up managing decline to build growth. Besides, and he could hear the smile in her voice, I have a partner who knows more about actual farming than any of my father's executives. Amelia, I'm flying back tonight. Commercial this time, turns out crash landing really does make you reconsider private planes. We have seeds to tend, Ethan, and a future to grow. After she hung up, Ethan stood in his field, surrounded by technology and tradition, and felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Possibility without conditions, hope without hedging. The seeds were in the ground. Amelia was coming back. The farm was saved and transforming. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors, 3 younger people in business casual, looking utterly out of place but determined. They introduced themselves as former Grant Global employees who'd resigned to join Amelia's new venture. She said we should see what we're fighting for, one of them said, a young woman named Chen. See actual soil, actual farming. Ethan gave them the tour, watching their wonder at things he'd taken for granted. The smell of earth, the precision planters' mechanical poetry, the way the land rolled toward the horizon like an ocean of potential. They took notes, asked questions, got their expensive shoes dirty, and seemed delighted by it. This is it, Chen said, standing where Amelia had planted the first row. This is where it starts. The revolution. It's just seeds, Ethan said. All revolutions start with seeds. Ideas planted in the right soil at the right time. As the sun set on the second day since the crash, Ethan found himself back at the old oak tree, looking out over his land, his saved, transforming, revolutionary land. The equipment cast long shadows. The irrigated field gleamed in the golden light. And somewhere beneath the soil, seeds were beginning their ancient magic of transformation. Tomorrow, Amelia would return. Tomorrow, they'd plant the rest of the eastern field. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, Ethan Walker stood on land his great-grandfather had broken, his grandfather had nurtured, his father had preserved, and he had almost lost. Now it would become something none of them could have imagined, a bridge between past and future, tradition and innovation, survival and success. Sarah would have loved this, he thought. The absurdity, the hope, the sheer audacity of it all. A CEO falling from the sky, corporate battles fought in boardrooms over Kansas farmland, seeds that might save agriculture or might just be expensive experiments in wishful thinking. His phone buzzed. A text from Amelia, just 2 words. Almost home. Home. She'd called his farm home. This woman who'd crashed here 3 days ago, who'd upended his life and hers, who'd sacrificed everything for a chance at something better. Ethan smiled and headed inside to make coffee. They had a long night of planning ahead, and seasons of work beyond that. But for the first time in years, the work felt like building rather than just maintaining, like growth rather than just survival. The seeds were in the ground. Everything else would follow. The car that brought Amelia back wasn't a rental, but a dust-covered Subaru that had seen better decades, purchased from a used lot near the airport, with cash and determination. She emerged from it looking nothing like the CEO who'd left for battle. Gone was the power suit, replaced by jeans and a flannel shirt that could have come from any farm supply store. Only her eyes remained the same. That storm gray intensity now mixed with exhaustion and something that looked like relief. "You bought a car," Ethan observed from the porch where he'd been waiting. "Seemed practical if I'm going to be living here." She paused at the bottom of the steps. "If that's acceptable to you." "Living here? On the farm? Not in your house." God knows that would set the county gossip mill spinning for decades. "But that old foreman's cottage by the western field, it's been empty since your father's time, right? I could fix it up, make it livable." Ethan studied her, this woman who'd given up corporate luxury for the chance to dig in dirt. "That cottage hasn't been touched in 15 years. The roof leaks, the plumbing's questionable, and I'm pretty sure there's a family of raccoons in the attic. So it's perfect for someone starting over." "Amelia, I need this, Ethan. I need to be here, to see the seeds grow, to prove this works with my own hands, not just through reports and video calls. I've spent my entire adult life in boardrooms and offices. I need to remember what real work feels like." He thought about the empty foreman's cottage, another piece of the farm that had been slowly dying from neglect. Then he thought about this house, too big and too empty since Sarah's death, filled with echoes and memories. "The raccoons are mean," he warned. "I've dealt with venture capitalists. How much meaner can they be?" That night they walked through the cottage with flashlights and hope. It was worse than Ethan remembered. Water damage had warped the floors, windows were cracked, and something had definitely died in the walls. But Amelia moved through it like she was surveying a palace, talking about potential and possibilities. "New roof first," she said, making notes on her phone. "Then the plumbing. I can camp in the front room while working on the rest." "You're serious about this?" "I've never been more serious about anything." She turned to face him in the dim light. "I've liquidated everything, Ethan. The penthouse, the investment properties, the art collection my father gifted me, all of it's going into agricultural innovation partners. We have 18 months of funding guaranteed, enough to prove the concept works or fails spectacularly. And if we fail, then I'll have learned to fix a roof and negotiate with raccoons. Still better than another board meeting." The next weeks passed in a blur of transformation. While Ethan tended the planted seeds, now showing the first green shoots of possibility, Amelia threw herself into renovating the cottage with the same intensity she'd once applied to corporate takeovers. She hired local contractors, paying fair wages that had Tom Harrison joking about the economic stimulus package that had crash-landed in their county. Chen and the other former Grant Global employees established a makeshift office in Ethan's barn, setting up computers and communication equipment among the hay bales and old farm equipment. They called it the most authentic headquarters in agricultural innovation, and their enthusiasm was infectious. Local teenagers started hanging around, curious about the intersection of technology and farming happening in their backyard. The seeds grew with encouraging vigor. The drought-resistant corn reached knee-height weeks earlier than traditional varieties, their leaves a deeper green that spoke of efficient nitrogen use. The companion plantings, nitrogen-fixing legumes between the rows, created a living system that reminded Ethan of his grandfather's more diverse fields before monoculture became king. "Look at this," Amelia said one morning, kneeling between rows with a soil testing kit. She'd been living in the partially renovated cottage for 2 weeks, showering with a garden hose and cooking on a camp stove, seeming happier than he'd ever seen her. Nitrogen levels are up 8% from baseline. The mycorrhizal network is establishing faster than the models predicted. In English, the fungi that help plants share nutrients, they're spreading, creating connections. Your soil isn't just recovering, it's building community. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, a man in his 60s wearing worn jeans and a University of Nebraska cap, driving a truck older than Amelia's new old Subaru. He introduced himself as Professor James Martinez, retired from the agricultural college. "I knew your grandfather," he told Amelia, surprising them both. "Howard Grant, stubborn as a mule but smart as a whip, had ideas about farming that were 50 years ahead of his time." "You knew him?" Amelia's voice carried a hunger Ethan recognized, the need to connect with family history, with roots deeper than corporate foundations. Taught a seminar he attended back in '78, Sustainable Practices Before We Had a Name for Them. He argued that industrial farming was borrowing from the future to pay for the present. Martinez looked out over the growing fields. Looks like his granddaughter finally figured out how to pay that debt back. He stayed for dinner, sharing stories about Howard Grant that Amelia had never heard, how he'd experimented with crop rotation patterns, documented insect populations, built his own composting systems. Her father had erased this history, embarrassed by his own father's backward ways, but here it was, resurrecting itself in a new generation. He would have loved this, Martinez said, gesturing to the integrated field system. Technology serving tradition instead of replacing it. Would you consider consulting for us? Amelia asked suddenly. We need someone who understands both the history and the science. I'm retired. So was I, briefly. It's overrated. Martinez laughed, agreed to think about it, and left with promises to return with his old notes from Howard Grant's visits. That evening, Ethan found Amelia sitting on the cottage's newly repaired porch, staring out at the fields with tears on her cheeks. You okay? I spent my whole life thinking I was betraying my father by opposing him. Turns out I was honoring my grandfather. She wiped her eyes, embarrassed. Sorry, it's been an emotional few weeks. You gave up everything for this. No, she corrected. I gave up nothing for everything. There's a difference. As summer deepened, the farm became a pilgrimage site for the curious and the desperate. Farmers facing similar struggles came to see the impossible. Crops thriving despite minimal chemical inputs, soil improving rather than depleting, yields that matched or exceeded conventional farming. Chen and her team documented everything, creating an open-source database of techniques and results. But not everyone was pleased. One morning, Ethan woke to find signs posted along his fence line. Corporate farming kills communities, and sellout Walker. Tom Harrison helped him tear them down, muttering about scared people lashing out at change. It's not personal, Tom said, but Ethan felt each sign like a blade. These were his neighbors, people he'd known all his life, and some saw his partnership with Amelia as betrayal. The confrontation came at the monthly Grange meeting. Ethan had attended these gatherings since childhood, watching his father and grandfather navigate the social dynamics of rural life. Now he walked in with Amelia beside him, and the conversation stopped. Heard you're letting city people experiment on your land, said Bob Thornton, whose farm bordered Ethan's to the south. Turning us into guinea pigs for some corporate scheme. I'm saving my land the only way I could, Ethan replied, keeping his voice steady, and sharing everything we learn with anyone who wants it. Nothing's free from corporations, someone called out. There's always a catch. Amelia stood and Ethan could see her shift into CEO mode, commanding attention without raising her voice. You're right. There is a catch. The catch is that we succeed or fail together. Every technique we develop, every seed variety we test, every piece of data we collect, it's all open source. Free to anyone who wants it. Why would you do that? Bob Thornton challenged. What's in it for you? Proof that my grandfather was right. That sustainable farming isn't just environmentally responsible, it's economically superior. And that the future of agriculture isn't in corporate consolidation, but in informed, empowered family farms. Pretty words, Bob said, but Ethan's still taking corporate money. I'm taking investment from someone who believes in what we're building, Ethan shot back, his patience finally fraying, which is more than any of you offered when the bank was foreclosing. The silence that followed was sharp with truth. These neighbors who now questioned his choices hadn't stepped forward when he was drowning. They'd watched, sympathetic but separate, each guarding their own struggling operations. We didn't have the money, Bob said quietly. Neither did I, Amelia replied. I had to give up everything else to get it. My position, my security, my father's approval. So before you judge Ethan for accepting help, ask yourself what you'd sacrifice to save your land. Old Pete Williams stood up in the back, his voice cutting through the tension. I've been farming for 60 years, seen more changes than I can count, most of them bad. But I've also been watching Walker's fields. That corn's the healthiest I've seen in a decade. If he's willing to risk his land to try something new, maybe we should stop criticizing and start learning. The meeting shifted after that, questions replacing accusations. By the end, 3 farmers had agreed to test small plots with Amelia's techniques, and Chen had scheduled soil testing for 5 more properties. Not everyone was convinced, but the hostility had softened into cautious curiosity. Walking back to the truck afterward, Amelia was quiet. Finally, she said, "They don't trust me. They don't trust change. There's a difference." "Is there? I'm still the corporate outsider playing with their livelihoods." Ethan stopped, turned to face her. "You're someone who gave up everything to prove that their way of life can survive." That's not playing. That's commitment they're only beginning to understand. The summer weeks brought extraordinary growth. The corn reached head height by late June, weeks ahead of schedule. The integrated pest management system, using beneficial insects and companion planting, kept damage minimal without pesticides. The soil showed improvement that typically took years to achieve. But the real test came with the summer storm system that rolled through in early July. Not the devastating storm that had brought Amelia crashing down, but a series of heavy rains that flooded conventional fields and flattened traditional corn. Ethan stood at the edge of his eastern field the morning after the worst of it, expecting disaster. Instead, he found his crop still standing. The deep root system of the new varieties had held, the improved soil structure had absorbed the water instead of letting it run off, and the companion plantings had prevented erosion. "It worked," he breathed, then louder, laughing. "It worked." Amelia came running from the cottage, still in pajamas and rubber boots, her renovation work having progressed to actual indoor plumbing, but not much else. She saw the standing corn and let out a whoop that echoed across the fields. They stood there, grinning like idiots, while around them other farms counted losses. It felt like vindication and responsibility in equal measure. Proof that the system worked, but also pressure to share it, spread it, make it accessible to everyone facing these challenges. The media attention started small, a local newspaper story about the experimental farm that had weathered the storm. But Chen knew how to leverage attention, and soon they had agricultural journals calling, universities sending researchers, even a documentary crew from a streaming service wanting to follow their progress. "We need to be careful," Amelia warned during a team meeting in the barn office. "Too much attention brings scrutiny we might not be ready for." "From who?" Chen asked. "Your father?" "Among others. There are a lot of entrenched interests that don't want us to succeed. Chemical companies, industrial farm operations, anyone who profits from the current system." As if to prove her point, a letter arrived the next day from Grant Global's legal department, claiming that some of Amelia's innovations had been developed using company resources and thus belonged to them. It was nonsense. She'd been scrupulous about using only her personal funds and public research, but it meant lawyers, fights, distractions from the real work. "He's trying to bleed us dry with legal fees," Amelia said, tossing the letter aside. "Death by 1,000 paper cuts." "So we fight back," Ethan said. "With what?" "We're farmers and agricultural scientists, not a legal team." The answer came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the legal threat arrived, a car pulled up carrying a woman in her 70s, sharp-eyed and elegant despite the Kansas dust. She introduced herself as Margaret Chen, Chen's grandmother, and it turned out one of the most successful patent attorneys in the country. "My granddaughter tells me you're fighting to change agriculture," she said, surveying the farm with interest. "I spent my career protecting innovations from corporate predators. Consider me your legal department." "We can't afford," Amelia started. "I'm 73 years old and have more money than I can spend in 2 lifetimes. What I don't have is the chance to fight for something that matters. You give me that chance, I'll give you an impenetrable legal defense." With Margaret Chen on their side, the legal threats evaporated. She filed counterclaims that had Grant Global's lawyers retreating, then went on the offensive, establishing patents for their innovations that were freely licensed to family farms but expensive for corporate operations. "Fight fire with fire," she said with satisfaction. Or in this case, fight corporate law with better corporate law. By mid-July, the farm had become something between a research station and a commune. Chen's team had expanded to 12 people, all camping in tents or trailers while the barn office hummed with activity. Amelia's cottage renovation had progressed to include actual walls and a functioning kitchen where she often cooked massive meals for the whole team. Ethan watched this transformation with wonder and occasional bewilderment. His quiet, failing farm had become the center of something larger, something important. But at the core, it remained what it had always been. Land that needed tending, crops that needed care, an endless cycle of growth and harvest that connected him to generations past. One evening, as the team celebrated another successful test result with barbecue and local beer, Ethan found himself standing apart, watching from the porch of the main house. Amelia joined him, holding 2 bottles of the good stuff, Sarah's favorite craft beer that he'd been saving for an occasion that never came. "You okay?" she asked, offering him one. "Just thinking about how much has changed. 3 months ago, I was ready to lose everything. Now," he gestured to the animated group spread across his yard. "Now, I'm not even sure what I have." "You have a future," she said simply. "We both do." They drank in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over fields that rustled with healthy growth. The corn would be ready for harvest in another month, earlier than any traditional variety. The soybeans planted in the western field were thriving with half the usual water requirements. Even the small test plot of vegetables was producing yields that had local restaurants begging for contracts. "Sarah would have loved this," Ethan said quietly. "Tell me about her." He'd avoided talking about Sarah with anyone, the grief too raw, too private. But something about Amelia's quiet attention, her own losses and sacrifices, made it easier. She was the optimistic one. "Always saw potential where I saw problems. When the doctors gave her 6 months, she planned for years. When the treatments failed, she still talked about next season's planting." He paused, swallowing past the familiar tightness. "She made me promise to save the farm. I think she knew something like this might happen, some miracle that would make it possible. Maybe she did." "You believe in miracles?" "I believe in convergence. Right place, right time, right people. Call it miracle or mathematics, but sometimes everything aligns exactly when it needs to." A shout from the yard interrupted them. One of the researchers had pulled up data on his tablet, showing yield projections that exceeded even their optimistic estimates. The team clustered around, excited voices carrying across the evening air. "We should go celebrate with them," Amelia said. "In a minute." Ethan caught her arm gently. "Amelia, what happens when the 18 months are up? When the experiment is complete and successful?" She looked at him, those storm-gray eyes serious. "Then we expand. We take what we've learned here and spread it to every farm that wants it. We prove that sustainable agriculture isn't just viable, it's essential." "And us? You and me?" The question hung between them, carrying more weight than just business partnership. Over the weeks of working together, something had developed. Not quite romance, not yet, but possibility. Shared glances over morning coffee, hands that touched while examining soil samples, a comfort in each other's presence that went beyond professional collaboration. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'd like to find out." Before he could respond, Chen called them over. The projection models were showing something remarkable. If the trends continued, the farm would not only be profitable, but would exceed conventional farming returns by 15%, while using 40% less water and no chemical pesticides or fertilizers. "This is it," Chen said, eyes bright with excitement. "This is the proof we needed." "It's not proof until we harvest," Ethan cautioned, but he felt the same excitement building. Everything they'd worked for, everything Amelia had sacrificed and he'd risked, was coming together in those numbers. That night, after the team had dispersed to their various sleeping quarters, Ethan walked the fields alone. The moon was full, casting silver light over the thriving crops. He could hear the sounds of a healthy ecosystem, insects buzzing, night birds calling, the rustle of small animals in the companion plantings. It sounded like life, abundant and sustainable. At the eastern field where Amelia had crashed, where they'd planted those first seeds under her father's disapproving gaze, he stopped. The scar from the plane was invisible now, covered by growth that seemed to have erased the violence of that night. Or maybe not erased, transformed. What had been destruction was now creation. What had been ending was now beginning. A sound made him turn. Amelia stood at the field's edge, also drawn to this spot where everything had changed. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Too much to think about? Too much to hope for." She moved to stand beside him. "I've spent so many years fighting against things. My father, the board, the system. I forgot what it felt like to fight for something. And now? Now I remember why my grandfather loved farming. It's not about conquering the land or maximizing extraction. It's about partnership, balance, working with nature instead of against it. Very philosophical for someone standing in a cornfield at midnight. She laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet fields. Everything's philosophical in a cornfield at midnight. That's why farmers are all secret poets. I'm no poet. No? Then what do you call someone who reads the sky like scripture and soil like sacred text? Who knows the language of seeds and seasons? I call him a farmer. Exactly. A poet of the practical. They stood together in the moonlight, two people who'd found each other through disaster and built something extraordinary from the wreckage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, harvest preparations, media management, the constant pressure to prove their model could scale. But tonight, they had this moment of perfect possibility, standing in a field that demonstrated everything they'd fought to prove. Amelia, Ethan started, then stopped, unsure how to voice what he felt. I know, she said softly. Me too. But let's see what the harvest brings first. Let's finish what we started. He nodded, understanding. They'd both lost too much to rush into something new without being certain. But the possibility was there, growing like the crops around them, ready to ripen when the season was right. A meteor streaked across the sky, brief and brilliant, and Amelia laughed again. Another crash landing? Ethan asked. Another transformation, something falling apart to become something else. They walked back together, comfortable in shared silence, while around them the revolutionary fields grew toward a harvest that would change everything. Or nothing, depending on nature's final vote. But either way, they'd transform more than just the land. They'd transform themselves, their understanding of what was possible when tradition and innovation met in fertile ground. The cottage's porch light was on, a beacon in the darkness. Amelia had installed it herself, along with most of the cottage's improvements, learning construction skills with the same intensity she'd once applied to spreadsheets. It was her home now, humble but hers, earned with sweat and determination rather than inherited wealth. Good night, Ethan, she said at her door. Good night, Amelia. He walked back to the main house, through rooms that no longer felt quite so empty. Sarah's presence was still there, would always be there, but it had shifted from painful absence to gentle memory. She would have approved of Amelia, he thought. Would have liked her combination of toughness and vulnerability, her willingness to dig in dirt and dream of stars. Before bed, he stood at the window looking out over the fields one more time. In 6 weeks, they'd harvest. In 6 weeks, they'd know if the revolution was real or just an expensive experiment. In 6 weeks, everything would change again. But that was farming, eternal cycles of planting and harvesting, risk and reward, death and rebirth. His grandfather had known it, his father had lived it, and now Ethan was part of it in a way that felt both ancient and utterly new. The seeds were growing, the future was forming, and somewhere between tradition and transformation, a fourth-generation farmer and a revolutionary CEO were discovering that the best things often came from the most unexpected convergences. The harvest began on a morning so perfect it felt orchestrated, as if nature itself had decided to validate their experiment with ideal conditions. Dew sparkled on the corn silk, the air carried that distinctive smell of ripening grain, and the sky stretched cloudless from horizon to horizon. Ethan stood at the edge of the eastern field with a cup of coffee, watching the sun paint everything gold when he heard footsteps behind him. The crews are here, Amelia said, joining him with her own coffee, her hands wrapped around the mug like she was holding something precious. She'd been up since 4, he knew, checking moisture levels and coordinating with the harvest teams. Dark circles under her eyes testified to weeks of little sleep, but her expression was electric with anticipation. You ready for this? He asked. I've been ready since the day I crashed. She paused, corrected herself. Actually, I've been ready since I was 12, sitting in my grandfather's funeral, listening to my father talk about progress while destroying everything Grandpa built. The first combine rolled into the field at exactly 7 o'clock, operated by Tom Harrison, who'd volunteered to help, curious about these revolutionary crops. But behind it A parade of equipment and observers. Agricultural scientists with tablets, journalists with cameras, neighboring farmers who'd come to witness either triumph or disaster. Even Bob Thornton was there, skeptical but present. The combine's header lowered into the corn, and everyone held their breath. The first few yards would tell them everything: yield, moisture content, kernel quality. Ethan found himself gripping Amelia's hand without conscious thought, both of them frozen as Tom made the first pass. Chen ran the numbers in real time, her tablet connected to the combine's yield monitor. Her face gave nothing away for long moments, then broke into a grin that could have powered the county. Ethan, Amelia, we're looking at 220 bushels per acre. The number hung in the air like a challenge to reality. Conventional corn in the area averaged 170 in a good year. This wasn't just success, it was transformation. Run it again, Bob Thornton demanded. That can't be right. They ran it again, 218 on the second pass, 224 on the third. The consistency was as impressive as the yield, uniform growth across the field, despite no chemical inputs, just the integrated system working as designed. By noon, word had spread across 3 counties. Farmers arrived in pickups and combines, turning the harvest into something resembling a festival. Someone brought a grill, others brought coolers, and soon the edge of the field looked like the world's most important tailgate party. Professor Martinez stood with a group of his former students, all now farming themselves, explaining the nitrogen-fixing system to anyone who'd listen. See how the legumes between the rows have created natural fertilizer? The corn's accessing nutrients that would normally require hundreds of pounds of synthetic additives. But the cost, one young farmer protested. All that precision equipment actually costs less over 3 years than conventional inputs, Chen interrupted, showing spreadsheets on her tablet. Initial investment is higher, but operational costs drop by 40% once the system's established. Richard Grant arrived at 2 in the afternoon, unexpected and unwelcome, his black sedan looking absurd among the muddy pickups and tractors. He emerged in a suit that probably cost more than most of the farmers made in a month, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the organized chaos of the harvest. "Amelia," he said when he found them. "Father." Her voice was steady, but Ethan felt her tense beside him. "Come to admit you were wrong?" "I came to see what my daughter gave up everything for." He looked around, taking in the celebrating farmers, the impressive yields being recorded, the media documenting everything. "It seems you've created quite a stir." "We've created proof that there's a better way." Richard picked up an ear of corn from the harvest wagon, examining it with the eye of someone who knew quality, despite his corporate distance from actual farming. "Your grandfather would have been insufferably proud." "Is that your way of saying you're proud?" "That's my way of saying Grant Global wants to license your techniques." The conversation around them stopped. Everyone turned to stare at Richard Grant, the man who'd tried to destroy this project, now standing in a field of revolutionary corn, asking for access to what he'd dismissed as fantasy. "No," Amelia said simply. "No? You'd refuse a partnership that could spread these techniques to thousands of farms?" "I'd refuse a partnership that would corrupt them. Grant Global would find ways to proprietize what should be freely shared, to create dependencies where we've built independence." "You're being naively idealistic." "I'm being strategically realistic. Every family farm that adopts our techniques becomes proof that your model is obsolete. Why would I help you co-opt the revolution that's going to replace you?" Father and daughter faced each other across a gulf that was philosophical as much as personal. Around them, farmers watched the kind of family drama that usually only happened behind closed doors, now playing out in a Kansas cornfield. "The board has authorized me to make a substantial offer," Richard continued, "enough to fund your operations for a decade. Our operations are already funded by people who believe in the mission, not the margins. You're making this personal. You made it personal when you tried to legally strangle us, when you sent investigators to find problems that didn't exist, when you told the agricultural press we were dangerously naive idealists." Margaret Chen stepped forward, legal steel in her elderly frame. "Mr. Grant, if you're here to make business proposals, they should go through proper channels. If you're here as Amelia's father, then act like it." Richard's composure finally cracked, showing something raw underneath. I don't know how to act like her father. I never have. She's too much like her grandfather, and I spent so many years trying to escape his shadow that I couldn't see she was his true heir, not me. The admission stunned everyone, including Amelia. For a moment, the CEO facade dropped entirely, and she was just a daughter hearing something she'd needed her whole life. Then stay, she said quietly. Not as Grant Global's chairman, just as Richard Grant. Stay and see what we've built. Have dinner with us. Listen to farmers talk about hope instead of quarterly projections. Richard looked around at the assembled crowd, weathered faces, calloused hands, people who measured wealth in soil health and community strength rather than stock prices. His entire worldview challenged by a successful harvest and his daughter's conviction. I'll stay, he said finally. For dinner. Nothing more. But he stayed longer than dinner. He stayed as the harvest continued into the evening, the combines working under lights to bring in the revolutionary crop. He listened to Tom Harrison explain how the irrigation system had saved 60% on water costs. He watched Professor Martinez show young farmers how to read soil health through plant indicators. He even held a tablet while Chen demonstrated the yield analytics that proved this wasn't a fluke, but a replicable system. Your grandfather tried to tell me this, Richard said to Amelia as they stood watching the final loads heading to storage, that farming was about relationships with the land, the crops, the community. I thought he was being romantic. He was being prophetic. Perhaps. Richard turned to Ethan, who'd been carefully neutral during the family dynamics. Mr. Walker, what you've allowed here, what you've risked, it's either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen. Sometimes they're the same thing, Ethan replied. Indeed. Richard extended his hand. Take care of my daughter. She's given up everything for this dream. She's gained everything, Ethan corrected, and she doesn't need taking care of. She needs partnership. There's a difference. Richard smiled then, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him. You'll do. He left as sunset painted the harvested fields gold, his sedan disappearing into distance while the celebration continued. Someone had brought out speakers, and music drifted across the land. Children played in the stubble while their parents discussed implementing these techniques on their own farms. Chen's team circulated with tablets, signing up participants for the next season's expanded trial. 43 farms, Chen announced as darkness fell. 43 farms want to participate next season. Can we support that many? Ethan asked. We'll have to, Amelia said. This is how it spreads. Farm by farm, season by season, proof by proof. As the celebration wound down and vehicles began departing, Ethan and Amelia found themselves alone in the field where it had all started. The harvest moon rose almost as full as it had been that night months ago when she'd crashed into his life. We did it, she said, wonder in her voice. We actually did it. You did it. I just provided the land. You provided 4 generations of knowledge. You provided trust when I was a stranger who fell from the sky. You provided... She stopped, searching for words. You provided proof that my grandfather's dreams weren't just dreams. They stood close, the air between them charged with more than harvest success. Throughout the intense weeks of growing season, they'd maintained professional boundaries, focused on the work, the mission, the revolution they were building. But now, with the corn harvested and the proof undeniable, those boundaries seemed suddenly arbitrary. Amelia, Ethan began, but she placed a finger on his lips. I know, but there's something I need to tell you first. She took a breath, gathering courage. I'm in love with this farm. With the work, the challenge, the community we're building. If anything more develops between us, you need to know it won't be because I need a place to belong. I've already found that. It would be because he kissed her, stopping words with action, and she melted into him with a sigh that sounded like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Because, he prompted, smiling, because somewhere between crashing and harvesting, I fell in love with the farmer too, the one who saved me in more ways than just pulling me from wreckage. Sarah would have approved, he said, surprising himself with the words. You think so? I know so. She believed in second chances. in unexpected gifts. She would have said you were worth the wait. They walked back toward the houses together, hand in hand, comfortable with the shift from partnership to possibility of something more. The cottage porch light was on, welcoming, and the main house no longer looked lonely against the night sky. "Move in with me," Ethan said suddenly, then immediately backtracked. "I mean, not tonight, not immediately, but—" "Ethan Walker, are you asking me to live in sin?" Amelia teased. "What will the neighbors say?" "They'll say it's about time. They've been placing bets on when we'd figure out what everyone else could see." "And what could everyone see?" "That we're better together than apart. That this revolution we're building isn't just about farming." She stopped walking, turned to face him fully. "I need to keep the cottage as an office, a space for the work. But yes, I'll move into the main house, Sarah's house, if you're sure. I'm sure she'd want it filled with life again. With future instead of just past." That night they sat on the porch of the main house planning the next season, which fields to convert, which farmers to support first, how to manage the explosive growth of interest. But they also talked about personal things, favorite books, childhood memories, dreams beyond agriculture. The conversation flowed like irrigation water, necessary and natural. "My father was right about one thing," Amelia said as midnight approached. "I am too much like my grandfather. Stubborn, idealistic, convinced that principles matter more than profit. Those aren't flaws. They are in his world." "Good thing you're not in his world anymore." She looked around, at the harvested fields, the cottage she'd rebuilt, the man beside her who'd lost everything and gained it back transformed. "No, I'm not. I'm in something much better." The next morning brought a deluge of media requests. The harvest results had spread through agricultural networks overnight, and suddenly everyone wanted the story of the CEO who gave up everything to prove sustainable farming could work. "We need to be strategic," Margaret Chen advised during an impromptu morning meeting in the kitchen. "Too much exposure brings unwanted attention. Not enough, and we can't spread the message." "I say we focus on agricultural media first," Professor Martinez suggested. "Build credibility with farmers before the mainstream press turns us into a sensation." They were deep in discussion when Tom Harrison's truck screeched into the driveway. He jumped out, face grim, holding his phone like it contained catastrophe. "You need to see this," he said, showing them the screen. The headline read, "Grant Global Sues Daughter's Company for Intellectual Property Theft." The article detailed Richard's apparent reversal, claiming that Amelia had developed her techniques using Grant Global resources and that all innovations belonged to the parent company. "That bastard," Amelia breathed, then caught herself. "No, wait. This doesn't make sense. Last night—" Her phone rang. Her father's number. "Don't believe the news," Richard said without preamble when she answered. "The board acted without my knowledge. I'm fighting it, but they've invoked emergency corporate protection clauses." "You're saying you didn't authorize this?" "I'm saying I'm about to wage war on my own company to protect what you've built. Your grandfather would appreciate the irony." She put him on speaker. "What do you need from us?" "Documentation. Everything that proves you developed this independently. Margaret Chen needs to file injunctions immediately." "And Amelia, I'm sorry. I thought I had more control than I do." The next weeks were a blur of legal battles fought in courtrooms and boardrooms, while the agricultural revolution continued in the fields. Margaret Chen proved to be a formidable opponent to Grant Global's legal team, using their own contracts against them, demonstrating that every innovation had been developed using Amelia's personal resources and public research. Meanwhile, the 43 farms that had signed up began implementing the techniques, each success story adding weight to their side of the legal scale. Local news covered farmers reporting early success with cover crops and companion planting. Agricultural forums buzzed with discussions of the Walker Grant method. "We need a better name than that," Ethan said one evening, reviewing press coverage with Amelia. "How about convergent agriculture?" she suggested. "The convergence of traditional knowledge and modern technology." "Convergent agriculture," he tested the words. "I like it. Sounds revolutionary without sounding threatening." The legal victory came on a Thursday afternoon in September, delivered by a judge who seemed personally offended by Grant Global's attempts to claim ownership of innovations they'd tried to suppress. Not only does the plaintiff fail to demonstrate any legitimate claim to the defendant's intellectual property, the judge stated, but the court finds evidence of deliberate interference with beneficial agricultural innovation. This case is dismissed with prejudice, and the plaintiff is ordered to pay all legal costs. The courtroom erupted. Farmers who'd driven hundreds of miles to attend the hearing cheered. Chen's team hugged each other. Margaret Chen allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Richard Grant approached them afterward, looking older but somehow lighter. "The board removed me this morning," he said simply. "Unanimous vote of no confidence. Father, I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm 67 years old and just discovered I've been on the wrong side of history my entire career. Unemployment might be the best thing that's happened to me." He looked at Ethan. "Mr. Walker, might an old corporate warrior be useful to your revolution? I know markets, distribution, scaling, things you'll need if this is going to spread properly." Ethan glanced at Amelia, who looked stunned. "You want to work with us?" "I want to work for you. Minimum wage if necessary. I need to understand what my father understood, what my daughter inherited that skipped me entirely." "We'll find something more than minimum wage," Ethan said, extending his hand. "Welcome to convergent agriculture." Fall arrived with its familiar rhythms, but everything felt different. The soybean harvest exceeded projections even more dramatically than the corn. The test plots of vegetables had restaurants competing for contracts. The soil showed improvement that typically took 5 years to achieve. Amelia officially moved into the main house on the autumn equinox, a date she chose for its symbolism of balance. They carried her belongings from the cottage in a parade of neighbors who'd come to help, turning the move into a community event. "Took you long enough," Tom Harrison's wife said, helping arrange furniture. "We've been waiting for this since July." "We were focused on the harvest," Amelia protested. "Honey, you can focus on more than one kind of harvest at a time." That evening, as they stood in what was now their bedroom, Amelia pulled out something she'd been hiding, a photo album, old and weathered. "Your father gave this to me," she said, handing it to Ethan. "He's been carrying it since the divorce." Inside were photographs spanning decades. Richard as a young man, standing in fields with Howard Grant. Richard and Amelia's mother, radiant and laughing. Amelia as a child, covered in mud, grinning beside her grandfather. And at the very back, a photograph Ethan had never seen. His own grandfather and Howard Grant, standing together at some long-ago agricultural conference, arms around each other's shoulders like old friends. "They knew each other," Ethan breathed. "More than knew. According to my father, they corresponded for years about sustainable farming. They were planning something together before your grandfather died. A demonstration farm that would prove their theories. And now we've built it." "Now we've built it," she agreed. "Convergence across generations." Winter came early that year, but they were ready. The fields rested under cover crops that would enrich the soil through the cold months. The barn office hummed with activity as Chen's team processed data and developed training materials for the 112 farms now signed up for the next season. Professor Martinez ran weekly seminars in the renovated cottage, teaching traditional techniques alongside modern applications. Richard Grant, true to his word, worked on distribution networks and market access, his corporate connections proving invaluable for getting premium prices for chemical-free produce. "We need to think bigger," Richard said during one planning session. "This could be a global model." "One field at a time," Ethan cautioned. "Revolution happens at the speed of seasons, not stock markets." But the momentum was building beyond their ability to control it. Universities sent graduate students to study their methods. International agricultural organizations requested presentations. A documentary crew followed them through winter preparations, capturing the unglamorous work that made the magic possible. Through it all, Ethan and Amelia built their life together with the same careful attention they gave to the land. They learned each other's rhythms, her tendency to work until exhaustion, his need for dawn solitude in the fields. They fought about expansion speed, reconciled over soil samples, found balance in shared purpose and growing love. "I never expected this," Amelia said one snowy evening, curled against him on the couch where she'd recovered from her crash. "When I got on that plane, I was just trying to escape my father's world. I never imagined I'd find a new world entirely." "When I woke up that morning, I was planning my last harvest," Ethan replied. Never imagined salvation would literally fall from the sky. Salvation's a strong word. What else would you call it? You saved the farm, saved my purpose, saved me from becoming a bitter memory of what the Walkers used to be. You saved me first. From the wreckage, from corporate emptiness, from a life that looked successful but felt hollow. They sat in comfortable silence, watching snow fall on fields that would soon burst with new life, new seasons, new proof that convergent agriculture worked. The revolution they'd started was spreading beyond their ability to contain it, and that was exactly as it should be. Next season will be chaos, Amelia said. All those farms to support, media to manage, probably more legal challenges from threatened industries. We'll handle it, Ethan said with confidence that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Together. Together, she agreed. And the word carried weight of commitment beyond farming, beyond revolution, into the personal transformation they'd both undergone. The fire crackled in the hearth. The old house settled into winter with familiar sounds, and outside, beneath the snow, seeds of change lay dormant but ready, waiting for spring to prove once again that the best convergences were worth any crash landing that brought them about. Spring arrived with explosive force that year, as if nature itself was eager to see what the new season would bring. The 112 participating farms had grown to nearly 300, scattered across 7 states. What had started as one desperate farmer and one crashed CEO had become a movement that agricultural journalists were calling the most significant shift in farming philosophy since the Green Revolution. But with growth came challenges. On a particularly chaotic morning in April, with 5 news crews on the property and Chen's team frantically preparing for the season's first major planting, Ethan found Amelia in the barn office, surrounded by charts and looking overwhelmed for the first time since he'd known her. "We're losing control," she said. "It's growing too fast. We can't properly support this many farms." "Then we get help," Ethan said. "Real help. Not just volunteers and believers, but infrastructure." "With what money?" "We're already stretched thin." The answer came from an unexpected source. That afternoon, a convoy of vehicles arrived carrying a delegation that included 3 university presidents, 2 senators, and surprisingly, the new CEO of Grant Global, a young woman named Patricia Hayes who'd risen through the ranks with a reputation for innovation. "Ms. Grant, Mr. Walker," Patricia said, extending her hand, "I'm here to propose something that might shock you. Grant Global wants to fund convergent agriculture as an independent entity, not to control it, but to learn from it." "Why would you do that?" Amelia asked, suspicion clear in her voice. "Because your father, before the board removed him, set something in motion. A trust, funded by his personal holdings in the company, designated specifically for sustainable agriculture innovation. He can't run it, conflict of interest, but he specified that you two should." Richard, who'd been mysteriously absent that morning, appeared in the doorway. "Consider it penance," he said, "or investment in redemption. Either way, it's yours to use as you see fit. $50 million, with more available if you meet certain impact metrics." The barn fell silent except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of tractors preparing fields. $50 million could fund education programs, research, support for farmers transitioning to convergent methods. It could scale their revolution to thousands of farms, maybe tens of thousands. "There have to be strings," Amelia said. "No strings," Patricia assured. "Just results. Grant Global is repositioning itself for a sustainable future. We need successful models to follow. You've created one. It's business, pure and simple." "Nothing's ever pure and simple in business," Ethan said. "You're right," Patricia admitted. "But sometimes business interests align with human interests." This is one of those times. They accepted, but on their terms. The money would fund education and transition support, not expansion of their own operation. The Walker Farm would remain the proof of concept, the teaching center, the heart of the movement. But the knowledge, the techniques, the revolution would spread freely. By midsummer, the impact was undeniable. Participating farms reported average yield increases of 18%, with 40% reduction in input costs. Water usage dropped by half. Soil health improved dramatically, And perhaps most importantly, farming communities that had been dying were suddenly vibrant again, young people returning to take over family operations that finally had a future. Ethan stood in the eastern field on the anniversary of Amelia's crash, the corn reaching skyward in robust green rows. She joined him, as he'd known she would, both of them drawn to this spot where everything had changed. 1 year, she said. 1 year since I fell out of the sky. Best crash landing in history. The documentary crew wants to recreate it. Can you imagine? Here's where the corporate executive nearly died and decided to become a farmer instead. You're not a farmer, Ethan said. You're a revolutionary who happens to farm. And you're a farmer who happens to be revolutionary. They stood together as the sun set, painting the thriving fields gold. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. A congressional hearing on sustainable agriculture where they'd testify, 3 international delegations visiting to learn about convergent methods, and Chen's wedding to a soil scientist she'd met during the project. But tonight, in this field where destruction had become creation, they celebrated the first anniversary of their convergence. The farm that had been 3 days from foreclosure was now the epicenter of agricultural transformation. The woman who'd been fighting a losing battle from inside a corporate boardroom was now leading a revolution from a Kansas cornfield. The man who'd been prepared to lose everything had gained more than he'd ever imagined possible. Sarah would be proud, Amelia said softly, knowing his thoughts. She would. She'd also be amused by the irony of it all. A Grant and a Walker, saving American agriculture by crashing into each other. Not crashing, Amelia corrected. Converging. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, they walked back to the house that had sheltered 4 generations of walkers and would, they hoped, shelter many more. The revolution was far from complete, the challenges still enormous, but the seeds were planted, the harvest was proven, and the future was growing in every field that embraced their methods. The Walker Grant Farm, as locals had started calling it despite their protests, stood as testament to the power of convergence, of tradition and innovation, of crisis and opportunity, of 2 people who'd found each other at the intersection of ending and beginning. And in fields across the country, seeds planted with hope rather than chemicals were growing toward harvests that would feed both people and possibilities, proving that sometimes the best transformations came from the most unexpected impacts, and that falling from the sky might just be another way of learning to fly.